All right, welcome to our weekday text gathering. Today is day 113 in the Circle's reading schedule, and we are discussing Chapter 7, Section 8, Your Boundless Self-fullness. In the Complete and Annotated Edition of A Course in Miracles, you can find this on page 289. In yesterday's section, we spoke of projection and the ways in which we try and free ourselves of conflict by projecting it onto others. Today, we are looking at extension and specifically extending our self-fullness, which we are told in this section is as boundless as God's. Our group continues to grow slightly larger. We had about 150 people yesterday. So if this is your first time joining us, please know that you can always find the reading schedule, the recordings, the handouts, and the access link for these gatherings at circleofa.org/text gatherings. We study the complete and annotated edition of A Course in Miracles from the Circle of Atonement here. If you do not have a copy and cannot purchase one due to financial hardship, we do have a few extras that have been generously donated to us, and we are happy to give them to anyone in need. So please email info@circleofa.org, and we'll be glad to help. So whether you are new or you've been with us since the beginning, a warm welcome to all of you. It is another day together, and we are so glad that you are here. And now, wherever you are in the world, I invite you to take a deep breath with me. And bow your head in prayer. Dear God, thank you for the opportunity to gather together today as friends and mighty companions on this wonderful and remarkable path of light. We surrender this gathering to you and ask that it be blessed by you. Dear God, we ask that you remove in us any blocks to the awareness of your presence. May we learn to think like you, that we may be led to the highest vision of ourselves and one another. We ask that you use this time to plant within us the seeds of grace, that we may emerge from this experience more peaceful, humble, and loving beings. Teach us what to do, because only that we will to do. Please take a moment to extend your love and blessing to everyone on this call. You can say silently to each person in your mind, serenity and perfect peace are yours. You are completely whole. You are at one with all creation and with God. Now take a moment to receive the love and blessing from all of those who are blessing you right now. Serenity and perfect peace are mine, because I am one self, completely whole, at one with all creation and with God. May we all be a source of miracles and healing within this group and within the world. And so it is. Amen.
Okay, well, we have a very abstract section to look at today. Let me go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. It's, as I said, very abstract, but it does have some very concrete implications, which we'll get to towards the end. The section is called Your Boundless Self-fullness. And to understand its starting point, we have to, I think, realize that this is talking about heaven, and not really the conventional heaven. It's a heaven that is so high and so pure that there are no forms, there are no colors, there are no boundaries of any sort. You could imagine sort of the conventional heaven with beautiful forms and colors and so on. you could just imagine that being taken to a further and further extreme where the happiness grows and the boundlessness grows and the joy and light grow until there are no forms. It's just pure light, pure being. To understand the starting point of this section, which is what it calls our self-fullness, I think it helps to understand our condition in the earth, because here we are not self-full. We are lacking, and we're constantly trying to figure out ways to fill the lack within. And we're born that way. I mean, for all that we extol little babies in spiritual circles, they, I've raised 4 of them, and they're like little lack machines, right? They are just constantly lacking, and you spend 24 hours a day running around trying to fill their lacks. So in this world, we start from this position of lack, and then we're trying to fill it. In heaven, it's the exact opposite. We start from this position where our being is boundlessly full. Let me read you a couple quotes about that. The Spirit knows, and the Spirit here is our spirit, our true being, knows that the consciousness of all its brothers, this is in heaven, is included in its own. So our spirit in heaven has a consciousness that includes in it the consciousness of all of our brothers, and the Course says there's an infinite number of them. So what kind of scope is our consciousness at that point? As it, the Spirit, is included in God's consciousness. So just as all of our brothers in heaven are inside our consciousness, so we're inside God's consciousness and therefore partake of his. So the conclusion is the power of the whole sonship, all of our brothers, and of its creator, God, is therefore its own fullness. So our being's fullness includes the entire sonship, the power of the entire sonship, and the power of God. So what kind of scope must our being have? And that's why he says later in the section, your self-fullness is as boundless as God's. So we're starting from this position of the opposite of lack, of being absolutely boundless in our fullness. And that leads to extending God's being. That's how we express our self-fullness. And the section has this story about this where God created us by extending his being to us, by sharing his being with us, extending it to us, and thereby having his being extended, increased. Okay, so that's our origin. The extension of God's being is our origin, and that means the extension of God's being is built into our nature. That's what our nature wants to do in heaven, just extend God's being. We just want to keep it extending. And we do that by creating our own creations in heaven, which is almost the ultimate brain twister for course students. Like, what does that mean, create our own creations? I don't want to get too sidetracked on that because we could spend a long time there. But the thing I'll say is we only do that creating in heaven. We create minds, spirits, you could say, that are themselves formless, eternal, etc. We don't create in the earth. Let me go ahead and read you this quote. The Spirit yearns to share its being as its creator did. Created by sharing, its will is to create. It does not wish to contain God, but to extend his being. The extension of God's being is the Spirit's only function. Its fullness cannot be contained any more than can the fullness of its creator. So the fullness of God overflowed to create us. We are also full, as we saw. That needs to overflow so that we create our creations, so that we just yearn to share our being, and at the same time, and it's the same thing really, to extend God's being. This is something that, we can't really conceive of on earth. We can't at all conceive of it, but we can sort of grasp some kind of facsimile of it. Just imagine that you're in heaven and you just yearn to extend your being, to share it. You yearn to extend God's being. And you know that's your function. That's your purpose, to extend God's being. And you do that through creating. Next category is that extending God's being is how we are fulfilled. Now, in this world, extending, giving, sharing, that so easily seems like loss. And so we recoil from that. But in heaven, doing that is not loss at all. It's not sacrifice. It's how we are fulfilled. It's our love. It's our joy. It's our peace. The passage says, that is why there is perfect peace in the kingdom. Every mind is fulfilling its function, and only complete fulfillment is peace. Now, this is a whole topic, but the idea in the Course is that it's just in our nature to extend, to express what's inside of us, to give it out, to share it, to extend it. And that's how we're fulfilled. And you can see that there is an earthly reflection of that. You know, we just released one of our older podcasts on Monday about the creative impulse. And from the Course's standpoint, that impulse you have in this world to create art, to create music, to create things, houses. For me, it's an impulse to write, to create children. There's something in us that wants to create, even though from the Course's standpoint, we shouldn't use the word create for it in this world. But it's the same basic idea. It's just in our nature. And if you don't get to do that, you're not going to be fulfilled. It's that way on earth, and it's that way in heaven. In heaven, it's our fulfillment to express our self-fullness. Just like on earth, it's our fulfillment to express ourselves in different ways. This is one of the ways in which the Course's picture of heaven differs from what we so often encounter in spirituality. The Course's picture of heaven is pure being, pure peace, pure bliss, but it's also pure creation. So it's receptive, it's passive, but it's also expressive. It's, in a sense, it is active, not active in the time sense, but there is a sense in which, just like God, we're creators. So all that's kind of hard to wrap our minds around. I understand that. And it's a whole discussion. It takes time. But just try to imagine that in your real being, you're in this limitless state. Your own fullness is boundless as God's. And all it yearns to do is extend itself. And in so doing, extend God's own being. And that through doing that, your fullness grows. That's your fulfillment. Okay, so if we can just imagine that that's all true of a state that is, really beyond our comprehension right now. But that's where we're from. That's our natural state. Okay, so now we come to the earthly implications of this. And there's a couple of them. First of all, the ego's selfishness. That's how we block extension and therefore block our fulfillment. Now, we don't really use the word selfish in spiritual circles. In my view, it's because spiritual circles tend to be very self-oriented, and selfish is a bad word. And the Course doesn't use it very much, but it uses it twice in this section. I often tell the story about how the word egocentric is used a number of times in the Course. And I went on Google to see if Course websites, Course in Miracles websites, use the word egocentric. And I only found they didn't, except for two exceptions. One is when there was a quote from the Course that included the word egocentric. So when some course website quoted the course using that word itself. And then the other was the Circle of Atonement had used that word. But basically, we don't like to talk about egocentric and spiritual circles, in my view, because spirituality has a lot of egocentrism in it. Anyway, but we know what selfish means, right? We get that. And it's the opposite of extension. And therefore, it blocks our only function and our joy. If it's all about you, that's the opposite of you making it all about extending, giving, sharing. And if extending, giving, and sharing are what fulfills you, then making it all about you blocks your fulfillment. And here's what the passage says. The ego's whole thought system blocks extension and therefore blocks your only function. It therefore blocks your joy. And this is why you perceive yourself as unfulfilled. Unless you create, you are unfulfilled. Now, I think we can understand that on two levels. The level that this passage is talking about is as long as we're not in heaven creating, we're unfulfilled. If we're on earth, we're missing our real function. We're feeling the lack of it and we're unfulfilled. Okay. The other level in which we can understand that is that unless we do some earthly reflection of heavenly creating, we'll be unfulfilled. And the ego blocks that too. The ego blocks both. It blocks our creating in heaven, and it blocks doing some earthly version of that on earth. Okay, last category, extending miracles, the earthly reflection of extension in heaven. Now, miracles, as defined in this sense, are expressions of love. So we could say extending miracles means extending love. Extending love to others is the earthly reflection of extending God's being in heaven. It is the path back, therefore, to the boundless fulfillment we enjoy in heaven. So when we're giving love to others on this earth, we're doing some kind of limited earthly reflection of the boundless function we have in heaven of extending God's being. Okay, and so by doing an earthly reflection of it, we get our minds in a place where it's mirroring our heavenly function, and thereby we're getting closer and closer to our heavenly function. And that's how this section ends. It says, miracles are reflections both of your own proper identification with your brothers. When you give love to others, you're identifying with them. And that's proper because you are identified with them in reality. They're reflections both of your own proper identification with your brothers and of your own awareness that your identification is maintained by extension. Okay. Identifying with your true nature is something, or even the knowledge, you could say, of your true nature is something you maintain by giving it, by extending it, by sharing it. So miracles are a way in which we mirror our heavenly function. And what that means is not drawn out in this section, but I think the implications are pretty plain when you think about it. That means that when we're trying to create in this world through art, okay, through building things, through cooking, through homemaking, through bringing children into the world, I mean, it's endless. We have that need. What this is saying is we need to make those avenues about really giving love to others. And those avenues can be used for that. But I think more often than not, they aren't. Right? I mean, the artist generally isn't thinking, some are, but I don't think most are thinking, how can I this is my act of giving love to my viewers, the viewers of my art. So often we're creating and not thinking of it as an avenue for giving love. And so from the Course's standpoint, the most important way in which we can reflect true creation here is basically is different forms of human kindness. That's how we really fulfill that creative impulse in us, or that's how we, get ourselves back to where we're ready for the real creative impulse in heaven. Okay, I know that I've gone longer than I planned to. We started late, just saying. So, do we have any? This has been very abstract, I know. Do we have any
No,
discussion?
it hasn't been abstract. I think all that you've been saying so far is incredibly practical. And I'm just struck by how yesterday's course sections tend to be very tight packages of their own teachings that function independently. And what I'm struck by today is how this section ties to yesterday's section on projection. And we talked about we project our lack, we project our anger, we project our attack, and that the ego's position is always going to come from that place of lack, and that is selfishness. And today we're talking about extending our self-fullness. And I think we all understand that piece in us that wants to extend itself. We all get the creative impulse. We have that thing that needs to be expressed, and we feel a little rudderless if it's not there.
Yeah.
But what I think is new, and I've never heard this anywhere else but the Course, is that thing in us is connected to extending our inherent desire to extend God's being and mirror our heavenly function. We know there's something spiritual about it because we all feel it, but who would have ever made the connection to we're looking to extend God's being through our own self-fullness?
I've not encountered that elsewhere. I've been thinking about this, and I realized that I've seen in many teachings the idea that we're supposed to be co-creators with God. But whenever I've encountered that, it's about co-creating with God in form, in time and space. I've never heard a teaching say what the Course says. It's about creating eternal formless spirit with him in heaven. Maybe there are teachings that say that. I just haven't encountered them. But yeah, it's an unfamiliar idea.
But what is so familiar is the desire for it, like the desire for the creation. We get that. And we feel a bit purposeless unless we hone in on what it is that we're meant to, quote unquote, create in the world.
Yeah.
But no one ever connects that to God. I think that's pretty extraordinary.
And we want a lot. We tend to want a big function, a lofty function. We want to do something grand. And could it be that's a distant reflection of the grandest function that there is?
Right. And that's another thing that who would have ever thought that that thing in us that just wants to have its purpose in the world is really that miracle impulse in us that just wants to extend love. So the more we extend love, the more we're finding our purpose in the world.
Yeah, you and I earlier were talking about this. I saw a documentary on a 20th century artist. His art was amazing. And he was a really sick person who extended that sickness in his artwork. And what the Course is saying is, no, that's not the creative impulse. It's about extending love.
Right. So Jenny says, is extension creation then?
Extension in heaven is creation. Nothing is creation on earth. Anything that you're thinking is it, anything that you can name as it is not it. We don't create in the earth or in any kind of time and space scenario. Higher planes, we don't create there either. It's only in the formlessness of heaven that we create.
Betty says, what about the creation, the quote unquote creation of this world? How does that fit in?
Well, the Course only uses the word making to talk about this world. And it is very clear that God did not make this world. We collectively dreamt it because God says only, how's it go? He is not mad, but only madness makes a world like this, which all the atheists say, and they've got a point.
Okay, Margaret says, isn't this also about extending for salvation? What bigger function is that?
Right. That's what we're doing here on earth. When our giving of miracles is our little part in the whole plan of the salvation of the world. It's all coordinated, it's all planned out. And that's a big function here. It's the biggest function there is, but even that's just preparation for the real show.
And Andrew says, what is love? Which is such a big question. And Andrew, or anyone, email me at emily@circleofa.org. We did a webinar, I think, with that exact title, What is Love? And I'll post it on the Facebook group for Course Companions or in the Circle of Atonement Facebook page for anyone else. So I'd like to share that.
Okay. I mean, but love is not hard to define. It's just valuing someone or something, and therefore, wanting to be near it, to share with it.
Yeah. Oh, I think Robert froze. Did I freeze or did Robert freeze or?
I hear you.
You hear me, but you don't hear Robert? Did he drop off?
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, that's
You
interesting.
dropped off for a minute.
Okay.
No.
Well, what Robert was saying about love is it's the feeling that arises when you value someone. And I love that definition. He's right. It's very simple. But we did go into a whole hour of course-based definition for love. And it looks like since he is gone, I will have to take over the exercise for today. So hold on one second, guys. Okay, so close your eyes. And think of a time when you expressed love to someone and felt fulfilled by it. And then say, extending love to, name that person, was an earthly reflection of my true heavenly function. It brought me one step closer to extending God's being in heaven, which is my only function and my joy. Let's do that one more time. Think of a time that you expressed love to someone and felt fulfilled by it. You felt fulfilled by it. And then say, extending love to, name the person, was an earthly reflection of my true heavenly function. It brought me one step closer to extending God's being in heaven, which is my only function and my joy. All right, everyone. Well, that is a wrap for today. I just got a text from Robert saying he's gone. So I will see you all here tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern, where we will continue our journey through Chapter 7. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you tomorrow. Unmute you so we can say goodbye.
See you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks for joining us.
Hey.